minds be open, our hearts be open to receive your word, Father. Give Matt the wisdom and discernment for where we go tonight and what we speak about, Lord. May we all learn something, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Matt, I got a question before you start.
Go ahead.
Why did you pick Mark?
I think I answered that question, didn't I?
Yeah, Julia asked
Yeah.
it first, but you.
Yeah.
Did I miss it?
You might have. I think it was the first time I started
I
this.
getting on the first time. Remember, I was late.
Oh yeah.
Denise, you had to help me get on. I was like 15
Yep.
minutes in.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of different reasons with Mark, but I think the two biggest ones that stand out to me is that it might be the oldest gospel.
Yes.
It's basically right from Peter. This is Peter's gospel that he was speaking as he was going around to the different churches, and what I basically learned was that people, as Peter was getting in his old age, and it had been prophesied by Jesus that he was going to die at the certain time, people were like, you've got to get this down on writing. And Mark was the one that kind of was underneath Peter that took it on himself to write this down and preserve it. So I think that's a good one of the good reasons for it. And then also it kind of gets overlooked sometimes too. It's small, it's short, but it's direct and to the point. It covers all of the big major points of the gospel. And really what scholars are thinking right now is that Matthew and Luke probably borrowed from Mark at some point. You see a lot of the similarities, and if Mark is the oldest, then when Matthew was writing his, if he came after it, then he was definitely borrowing it from it. So this is about as close to the source as we can really get for what Jesus did. Each gospel is a little bit different on what they focus on, but in Mark's telling, it's really direct and to the point. It's like nonstop miracles, and we also start to get a really good sense of the suffering servant throughout this.
Yes. Yeah, both of them really excellent reasons. I wondered if that was it because I love Peter, so I wanted just to see if we were on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because you can relate to Peter.
I certainly can.
a couple things. I think next week we're probably just going to take a week off. I know everybody's they've got some stuff going on. We're going to be finishing up Mark 4 this week too, so this will give me a chance to start catching up and getting and diving into Mark 5 a little bit more too. So we'll take next week off, and then just as a word of caution, I know the first week I had sent out a email with a video from this YouTuber called Inspiring Philosophy, and it was over the question of why did God allow evil? Why did God create Satan, knowing that he was gonna rebel? And Inspiring Philosophy had a really good video on evil and the nature of it and free will that I passed around. I just started watching some of his other stuff, and I just kind of want to caution you guys, as you're watching it, that there's some really bad theology that he ascribes to. The biggest one that I saw that kind of has kicked me off on this was a video I watched where he does not ascribe to ex nihilo, which basically means out of nothing. So the way that he views creation is not creation. He views it as the way I looked at it, and when I was talking to Jenny, it was like basically an alien showed up on an unformed Earth and just made it real nice. That's kind of his view of it. And so, just as a caution, there's people out there that have a lot of good information, but they're not always right. So just use the spirit, make sure you're discerning what you see, because, if you took, everything that Inspiring Philosophy said as gospel, he could lead you down a path where you're starting to really not believe the same things as the Bible teaches. So I just wanted to caution that. if I would have known, back when I sent that out, I would have brought it up then, but I only just saw this video, so I just wanted to caution on that. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna finish off 4 tonight. It's this is the last part of it. It's 7 verses, but I think we're gonna dive pretty deep into it. So, kind of as a recap of where we were last week. We finished off the parables, right? So 4 is kind of an interesting chapter. It's very different from what we've kind of experienced before. We get, Jesus' big teaching of, beginning of 4 is the parable of the sower. And then we get, the purpose of the parables, the only time that we really get Jesus fully explaining the spiritual and physical nature of the parables. And then we get, 2, 3 other additional parables on top of that. And then as we're ending up here, something that it's one of the most significant things that Jesus does, and we'll talk a lot in depth about this. So as we dive into this is all in the same day. So it's taking us 3 weeks to kind of cover all this, but this was all happening on one single day, and that's where we'll start off at 35. So I'm going to read this whole thing because it doesn't really make sense to break it down verse by verse on this, because we're going to have to take the whole thing as a whole. We are going to go individual pieces, but I'll go and read the whole thing. So verse 35 starts off and it says, "On that day when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, he took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So, like I said, 7 verses here, but there's a lot that's kind of packed into here. Is there anything that kind of stands out to you guys at first, looking at this story, from the bird's eye view?
I think the first thing that I thought of, because, in the previous verses in this chapter, we've talked about how his family kind of thought he was crazy, and people is like, this is the first time you see the apostles really state out loud that they think he's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
They don't think he's crazy in the same demonic way, but they're like, wait a second, this guy is totally nuts. He's sleeping while we're being tossed all over the place.
Yep. That's a good point. Marie, did you have something?
I think one of the biggest thing here is if you take it as a whole, first of all, evening was come. What are they doing on the water in evening? Most of, there's no light. It's not like we have boats today. I mean, what did they have? A flame? And not only that, I always wondered about the other thing. It said, with other boats.
Yeah.
Yep.
Who were the other boats?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it never really tells you that. I mean, I'm assuming it's some of the crowd, but was it?
Yeah. And that's actually, I'll cover that a little bit, but that's unique to Mark. This is not seen in any of the other Gospels. This lends to the historicity of all of this, is that this is obviously an eyewitness account as Peter remembered it. These little details that are thrown in here, it adds to the authenticity and historicity of this specific event. Because why add these little details? They don't add anything. It adds more questions than anything else. But if Peter's sitting there dictating this to Mark, he's just going to write down. He's going to be faithful to what he hears.
Diane, do you have something?
Yeah. So what stood out to me most of all is when they're speaking to one another, who then is this? You haven't gotten it yet?
Yep.
You haven't gotten it? I mean, you've seen miracle after miracle, and they're still in a state of denial with him.
Yep. Yeah, no, that is, and you know, this is kind of that question at the end. They call it like Markan phrases, and it's kind of like this meta narrative that's over out the, you know, the entire gospel, is that Mark's not going to come out and say, you know, this, but there's going to be a lot of these questions that pop up, and we're gonna dive into that. You know, it's not just asked, like, it's not just the disciples they're asking. It's kind of Mark putting that out there too. Like, who do you think this is? Who do you think Jesus is? Right? That he's able to do these things. This question pops up again and again and again because Mark is really leading you to ask that yourself that question and figure it out. Right? He's not going to hold your hand really. He's going to give you all the information. Then you've got to say to yourself, all right, who is Jesus? Right? Who is Jesus? Well, Sue, it's Sue.
I got it.
All right.
And I think it's another too, Matt, is that it kind of gives us a glimpse of how people that see things and have faith can also have great faith comes great sometimes doubt.
Yep.
At different seasons in our lives. And even seasoned people. I mean, I remember Pastor said that he's had doubt at times in his life before, and you'd never think you'd hear that out of somebody. But I think we've all gone through some doubt in our lives for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And it's situational when you think about it. Our doubt comes from our situations in our lives.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the doubt is healthy if you deal with it. I think it's not healthy if you just have those seeds of doubt in your head and then you just try to push them off and ignore it. I think that is Satan to say, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, you know? But that's, you know, the whole, you know, Peter tells us, you know, be ready to defend, right? To know why you have faith. Where do you get this hope from? You know, why, and to be able to do that, to be able to defend that to somebody else, you need to be able to answer that question yourself. You know, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you have this hope? You know, I challenge everybody, if you don't have that answer, you need to figure it out, because there's going to be a point in your life where there is going to be real doubt. And if you don't have that answer, then there's a I'm not going to say a good chance, but there's a possibility that you walk away because that doubt becomes too extreme. And I think, you know, Templeton, I talked about him a couple weeks ago. I think he always probably had that doubt in his head. And it wasn't a single event. You know, I think he points to it as looking at the Time magazine cover with the baby dead in its mother's arms, and that, you know, that he looks at that as, that was my moment that I couldn't reconcile my belief anymore. But that wasn't an overnight thing. That had been something that had been bothering him for a while, but rather than answering that question himself, he kept pushing it off until it was too much, and then it hardened his heart to the point that he walked away completely. So, like, if you've got an issue, if you've got a concern, if there's something that's bothering you, then that's something that you need to investigate. God does not call us into blind faith, right? Like, and I've you know, I'm taking a theology class right now, so so Jenny gets a lot of this, but like right now in the last 2 weeks, we've been covering general revelation and special revelation. And so, you know, general revelation is looking at the earth, you know, all of the things, you know, looking at God's creation. And, you know, Romans 1:20 tells us that we're without excuse. There is no reason that anyone in the world can look around and say there's no God. And you can dive deep into it. Like I was just watching a video from, I forget the guy's name. He's an astrophysicist, and he does a lot of stuff with answers in Genesis. But he was talking about this mathematical pattern that was only just discovered in the 80s because, you know, computers were able to map this out. And he found this guy found these repeating patterns and these fractals all over the place. No matter where you look, you see God's handprint on it. You know, down to the even the smallest, you know, piece of atom. Like, you'll see God's handiwork. You'll see it there. The more you look, the more you see it. And I think, you know, there's Richard Dawkins had put this out there that And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, has basically said it too, of, you can't be a scientist and be a theist. They're looking at him as being incompatible. And then they put up these, statistics of, 95% or whatever it is of philosophers or blah, 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 whatever, don't believe in God. And, it turns out that was a made up number. That wasn't real, because the people, the scientists that start getting into hard science, that look into the universe, that start looking into the, the basic building blocks of life, they might not be Christians, but they're theists. They believe in a God because of what they're seeing. They're looking at the universe and saying, we don't have an answer for this. None of this makes any sense. The naturalist explanation doesn't work. And the only one that the only answer right now that satisfies where they are intellectually is like, there's got to be a God out there. I don't know if it's a Christian God. I don't know if it's a Jewish God. I don't know if it's, Hindu God. I don't know what it is, but I can look at it and say, there's a God. And that's what general revelation is. God has put his handiwork all over the universe for us to discover. Now, special revelation is Jesus says, I'm the only way to the Father, but he's given us the pathway to get there, to reveal himself in that way. So, we're meant to push. We're meant to look. We're meant to ask those questions, because God is going to give us the answers. He's going to show us what we need at that moment. But if we try to push that off, that's not God saying, just believe and just trust and don't ever investigate. That's not God. That's Satan, so that when you come into a crossroads, you're going to struggle with faith at that point. And Satan is the master deceiver. He's got plans. He knows he's an opportunist. He knows what he's doing. He knows humanity better than we know ourselves. And so he can set these stumbling blocks up for us. And so, like I said, if you're struggling with something, dive into it. There's answers out there. There will be an answer. You have to dig yourself, and not just sit there and just, take it off on blind faith. If there's something nagging at you, look for that answer. So, okay.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, can I throw something out for
Yeah.
y'all to dive into, since you're on the theology side of this? Zoroastrianism. A lot of people don't even know what that is, but that's believed to be actually predating Judaism, but it's based on monotheistic belief. So even the evidence, even before the scriptures were discovered, there was a belief in one God and a creator.
Yep.
So, people fail to realize this is actually predates Judaism. So Zoroastrianism, and research it if you're in that kick right now with theology, because that's also undeniable proof that we have a creator.
Yep.
Regardless of what you want to call him, we have a creator.
Yep. Okay, so we already kind of talked about this a little bit, but I think, Marie, you brought up a good point. Why did they cross at night? What are they doing out there? Right? I think that is a really valid question to ask. And you saw that I have a map. So let me actually switch. Okay, so this is the path that they took. This red is their travel out. So they left from Capernaum and they're going to Gergesa. And we'll cover this next week. This is where, not next week, but the week after. This is where Jesus cast out Legion, right? So they're not actually trying to get here at this point. I think they're actually going towards Bethsaida, but the storms kind of redirected them a little bit of where they end up. But I've got the terrain on here, and so you can see, this is the Sea of Galilee. It is surrounded by mountains, right? So anybody, we have foothills, we have mountains around us. That the cold air comes down off these mountains pretty fast. Like the stone generally can't hold the heat. The wind comes over and it blows down. And so when you've got the big mountains on the side in a valley, they're going to go to the low point, right? All right, so now we know about water. Water retains heat really well. If it's been hot all day, right, and then the sun goes down, that water's still going to be hot, right? Okay, so we live in New York. What happens when cold air meets hot air?
Let's
Bad
not be
news,
on the
Matt.
lake.
Yeah.
What happens?
You get a really bad storm.
Yeah.
You know,
Bad.
that way, when we, because we live in central New York, so sometimes it'll be 90 one day and then it's going to be like 20 the next, and when that happens, we're getting a really bad thunderstorm. And so the same thing happened here on the Sea of Galilee, and it was known by everybody that lived out there, especially these fishermen, that this happened at night specifically because of the cool air coming down off of the mountains onto the warm air of the sea. So Jesus would have known this, right? So again, why did he decide to go out in the middle of the night? Could have just stayed in Capernaum. Why did he decide to go out in the middle of the night?
Wasn't it a perfect lesson?
Yeah.
He already knew it was going to happen.
Yep. I think that's the only explanation that we can really have, right? Is that he was engineering this moment. He engineered this entire thing. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And remember, let's go back a little bit, right? We'll go back to the parable of the sower, right? Verse 13 here. Do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all parables? They're struggling still. They're still not getting it, kind of like what you talked about, Diane. The last question that they have here, right? They're not getting it, and so Jesus, like, I'm gonna have to show them something. I'm gonna have to get a little creative here and crazy to show them who I am, to get them to understand a little bit better. There was no reason for them to go out on the sea that night. There was no reason at all. But Jesus has a plan for everything. He's still in control. He knows what he's doing. So we got, this setup now, and then, as we mentioned earlier, this is the only time in any of the gospels that the other boats are mentioned. We don't know who they are. It could be other disciples. But when we looked at that boat, a couple weeks ago, that could have held all of the disciples, right? So
Right.
was it other followers? Was it other people of the crowd? We don't really know. But like I said, it's an interesting eyewitness detail, but it enlarges what Jesus is doing here, right? He's not just saving, when he calms the storm, it's not spoilers, we already went through it, but when he calms the storm, he's not just saving those closest to him, but everyone who followed him out into the sea. So it kind of enlarges what he's doing here. So, it seems like it might be kind of like an extra detail that doesn't add a lot, but it might actually add a lot more to it once you start really thinking about it.
So I just wonder also, like, you said it yourself, Matt, that most of these guys were fishermen, so they would know what it's like on the water at night.
Yep.
Nobody questioned him.
Yeah.
Said, let's go to the other side. So nobody questioned him until they were already in the storm. Like, nobody said, hey, you're crazy. Why would we get in the boat right now?
Yeah. And remember that thought, because we're gonna dive into that aspect.
Well, yeah, because isn't it like we do that? We say we trust God, and then all of a sudden something hits us that's really hard, and we fall apart.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, and I wonder if some of it also, like, towards, I know we're going to get back to that last verse again, verse 41, is some of this, I'm sure, still goes back to, they're not looking for a Messiah who's going to, like, talk and solve all the problems with lessons, right? They're still looking for that military leader.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking Messiah is going to come, call down fire and control the weather.
Yeah.
Necessarily.
Well, we got to remember too that one of the mysteries that wasn't revealed to them at the time was the exact nature of the Messiah. It was, okay, Son of God, but what does that mean, right? Who is the Messiah? And looking at it as militaristic, the only verse that really even gives an indication of the true nature of the Messiah is Isaiah 46. It's the only one when it talks about the name. Make sure it's Isaiah 46. Oops, sorry, hold on. 9:6, sorry. It has 6 in it. Yeah, so this messianic prophecy out of Isaiah 9:6, for us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Right? This is and I think even at the time, I've watched a couple different takes on this, that this was meant to be taken as, I think Hezekiah fulfilled this prophecy in the time. There's a lot of things with predictive prophecy where it's means it's going to come true short term, but also long term. And so short term, I think they were looking at this as Hezekiah, but it doesn't really jive, right? Because if you're like, all right, his name's going to be called Wonderful Counselor, okay, we'll go with that, right? Like, sure, that seems like a good name for a king. All right, but what about Mighty God, Everlasting Father? That's a little bit extra, right? That, like, how can a king of Israel be called Mighty God? You know, nobody gets to be called God but God. How can it be called Everlasting Father? You know, Prince of Peace. You know, we can give it that. Wonderful Counselor. That makes sense for an Israeli king. But what about Mighty God and Everlasting Father? And I think that was, they didn't fully understand it at the time. It's one of those mysteries that had to be revealed, of the actual nature of who the Messiah was.
Well, you think about that whole verse, that the Trinity's right in that whole verse.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of debate over that verse, and part of the issue with Hebrew is that it didn't have punctuation. So, we get the commas in here. They don't have anything like that. So, breaking it up, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And I think rabbinical scholars that deny that Jesus is the Messiah look at it one way. Christians obviously look at it at another way. There's been a lot of like retconning of the whole thing. I watched a few different things and did my own research on Isaiah 9:6, and I didn't expect it to be one of the most hotly debated verses in the Old Testament, but it apparently it is. So there's a lot that really goes into it. But so yeah, they don't know, right? They don't know actually the nature of the Messiah at this point, and this is Jesus still revealing that. This is still, we're probably getting about halfway through his ministry right now. If you go back to when I broke down like the major outline of Mark, 1 through 11 covers Jesus's ministry, and then 11 through 16 is Passion. So we're getting to towards we're past the half point probably at this point of his ministry. We're starting to get towards the end here, and he still hasn't fully revealed who he is yet, and he doesn't really even do that until the resurrection when he comes back. But they're just starting to figure this out, and they're asking the questions. So, all right, moving on a bit. Let's look at now this windstorm itself, right? So, what kind of imagery is evoked here? Because we're getting some pretty vivid, descriptive images of this storm. So, what kind of comes to your mind? You're reading verse 37.
Pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
The waves were actually coming into the boat.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. The waves are pretty high.
Yeah.
They're really frightened. This is all coming together, these 7 verses, and really how Jesus is revealing himself to them.
Yeah. This is not a small storm. This storm is threatening to tear apart the boat. The word that we get here, where the word says the waves are breaking into the boat, it's epivalo, and so I have this from a theological dictionary of how this word gets used throughout the New Testament, and it's depicting a violent movement of casting on or over, and especially a hostile seizure. So this is kind of this in Mark 14, when they come to arrest Jesus to be crucified. It's the same word that's getting used here. So this is violent waves coming over the sides of the ship, and we're already getting, so the boat is already filling, right? So we're getting this incredibly violent storm with the waves crossing over the side. It's forcibly impacting, and it's almost like we're getting this image of the waves attacking the ship. And so we looked at the picture, and it's hard to see from the what they found, with the Jesus ship, but looking at the pictures, the sides of these ships are also pretty low. They're open boats, right? It's not like a cruise ship of what we think of. It's an open boat with the sides are only about 4 feet high. So these waves are coming over, they're crashing over, and anybody that's been in a boat, you get too much water in the boat, it's going down, right? And so that's what they're worried about. They're panicking. It put anybody into this situation. You've got this violent storm that basically popped up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, it's looking like you're going down, because you're not going to get through this storm. It's going to, if it doesn't fill the boat with water, one of these is going to capsize it. One of it's going to, bust out off the side. It's going to, fill it with water that way. There's basically no way out. There's probably plenty of people, especially fishermen, would have known this, right? Most of these guys that they had as his disciples, are fishermen or grew up in a fishing community. They probably heard all these stories of people just like them. Well, I can make it across tonight, and then the storm blows through, and then they never make it to the other side. They die in it. And so that's what they're thinking of. That's that's going through their head right now, is this storm is going to kill us. We knew we shouldn't have come out. We knew we should have said something. I don't know why we trusted this guy in the first place. Like they're in full on panic mode right now because of how violent this storm is.
I think you can, Mark. I think you can see that by the statement they make in 38.
Yep.
I mean, they're not. I can just see them having an attitude.
Yeah.
When they speak that to him.
Yeah. And when there's no formality really in this, like the only formality that you really get is when they call him teacher. But they are this, like, the way that Mark is kind of using this in these words in the Greek, it's not a very formal thing. This is just like coming out, like word vomit coming out of their mouth. They're like, Jesus, what are you doing? You're sleeping, right? So I think we're getting, we're starting to get to the the meat of all this right now, right? So we've got this violent storm, right? And then we get, but Jesus is asleep in the stern on a pillow, cushion of pillow, right? And so these boats are they've kind of tilt up at the front, and they're raised up, and this is where Jesus is. So he's in the stern, sleeping at the front of the boat, right?
And that alone tells you.
Yeah. So why is he sleeping? Why is Jesus sleeping right now?
He's not concerned.
Yeah. He's also tired. He's a human, right? He's tired.
His point of view, Matt, is I don't know about the rest of it, but I can walk on water.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mentioned, this is he's been teaching all day. That's what we get from verse 35, is that the entirety of chapter 4 is in a single day. So
Yeah.
Jesus has been in, teaching all day. We've already gotten the images of the crowds. They don't even let these guys eat, so he probably hasn't had a good meal. He's been nonstop, because we know he gets up early in the morning to pray and be separated. So he's been up probably since like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We're 8, 9 o'clock at night right now. He's tired. He just wants to get some sleep. Like, he's just exhausted from it. But as you said, Marie, it's not just him showing his humanity here. He's also not concerned with the storm overtaking. He knows he's still in control. The storm's only going to overtake him if he allowed it to. But he knows it's not the appointed time. He knows he's meant to die on a cross, not drown at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. So he's got no fear of the storm. He knows that his purpose is not fulfilled yet. And so the storm can get as bad as it wants. It don't matter. It doesn't matter to him. So now, like, we're gonna skip back to the Old Testament here a little bit, because now you guys need to start putting your goggles on here of seeing Jesus throughout the Old Testament. And before I dive into this, what story does this remind you of?
Jonah.
Yeah. So who else was sleeping in the midst of a storm?
Jonah.
Yeah. So we can contrast this to Jonah 1:5-6, right? It says, then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down to the inner part of the ship and had laid down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps that God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." This is strangely familiar of what's happening here, right? This is almost word for word of kind of what we're getting. So again, looking at this from the perspective of the Jesus and Jonah's parallel, as Jonah slept, the other actors in the story are completely helpless too, right? So in the same way the disciples are helpless as Jesus slept, they're seeing the storm around them, and the one person that could do something about it, Jesus or Jonah, right? Because the mariners knew, the sailors knew that this was Jonah's fault. He had already mentioned it, that he was running from his God. So they already knew this. The storm is upon them, and he's out there sleeping. So in both stories, there's only one person that can do something about this. But rather than Jesus being the victim, as Jonah was, Jesus is the victor, right? And Jesus does compare himself to Jonah as well. It's not just the sign of the Jonah of being in the belly of the earth for 3 days. In Matthew 12:41, he says, something greater than Jonah is here. So Jesus is directly comparing himself to Jonah. But what we're getting here, though, is that where Jonah shirked his responsibility and was disobedient to God, Jesus was obedient to the point of death, right? Philippians 2:8, right? And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So start looking at this story now through the Jonah lens, right? That Jonah was disobedient. Jonah didn't trust God. He knew God's nature, but didn't want to follow him. The storm came up. He was swallowed by the sea. But this isn't a direct one-to-one comparison. It's a contrast, right? That's the way that we have to look at. Jonah was the imperfect bearer of God. God gave him a command. He didn't want to follow through on it. He had to go kicking and screaming. He became a victim of it, of his own disobedience, where Jesus was the victor because he was completely obedient to the point of death.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dive a little bit more into Jonah. We've got a couple other places where this is going to come up. So yeah, you got Jesus sleeping on the pillow, right? And now the disciples are waking, right? Jesus is probably not happy at this point. He's probably just fallen asleep. So why did the disciples wake Jesus up?
Because they still had a little faith. that they knew that he could do something, but they just wasn't sure what he could do.
Yeah. I think there's faith there, but fear was greater.
Yes.
Fear was greater than faith.
Yes.
So when I look at this story, I think about this was actually my first night in Afghanistan. So we're in Bagram, and we're in the big tent cities, the transitory tents, waiting to get to our permanent housing. And IDF sirens go off. This is my first time in country. I don't know what's going on. I know IDF sirens, probably not a good thing. And I'm looking around because I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do at this point. I see Ron Black, Sergeant Ron Black, which kind of reminds me of my dad a lot. He is panicking. He's in his underwear. He's got his helmet on backwards. He's underneath his bunk. He's got like the his body armor trying to cover himself up. And I'm like, I don't think I want to be like that guy. I know he's a staff sergeant. I'm only a specialist, but I don't want to be like that guy. And then I'm looking around and I see my captain, and he's still on his bunk and he's reading. There's no fear in him. I knew that Captain Bonifazi had been deployed multiple times. So I'm looking at Captain Bonifazi and saying, if he ain't worried, I ain't worried. Right? That's what the disciples should have done. They should have looked to their leader and said, well, Jesus isn't worried. Right? Why are we? Why are we panicking? But they do the exact opposite. They let their fear overtake them. So, what they're doing, they're running up to Jesus and, shaking him awake and saying, what do we do? Like, what, don't you care? Don't you see all this going around? What do we do? Instead of following Jesus's example, they're looking at him and saying, he doesn't care. He's like, maybe the Messiah will be fine, right? He's the Messiah, but, we're flesh and blood. We're going to die. That's like, does he not care about us? Have we been following a lie? Have we been just following for no reason? So, their faith is beyond wavering at this point. So they don't understand Jesus. They don't get Jesus at all. Like I said, they're experienced fishermen, so they're understood the danger of the storm. They understood probably better than the average person the situation that they were really in. But they're asking themselves, why would Jesus bring us into the storm, right? Why would he do this? He's already kind of shown his omnipresence, right? He's already shown that he sees things that the normal person doesn't see, that he can see into the future, that he can see at all places at once. So obviously they're looking at this like he knew this was going to happen. Why did he bring us here? And so you also have to look at their mindset too. They're still under the old covenant. They're under the old covenant where God is protecting and punishing Israel and all nations with natural disasters. When God wants to make a point about a nation going astray, he's going to use a natural disaster. That's the way the old covenant worked. It was all about worldly things. And so they're looking at it and saying, wait a second. Are we getting punished for disobedience? Because that's what happens. That's, when these earthquakes come, when Nineveh gets destroyed by an earthquake, when Tyre and Egypt get destroyed by fires and floods and all these natural disasters, this is because they weren't obeying God. They weren't listening to God, and they're looking at this themselves saying, wait a second, I followed him into the boat, like we were talking about earlier. Doesn't seem like anybody questioned it. They just got into the boat. They knew that this could happen, that the way these storms pop up. They just got into the boat. They're being obedient to Jesus. In their mind, it's like, all right, we're being obedient to God. He's obviously from God, so we're going to trust him. We're going to go with him. And the storm breaks out and it's starting to shatter their worldview. They don't get what's going on here. And I think you put yourself into their shoes. That Jonah's story has got to be vivid in their head at this point. right? Jonah 1:4, but the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so the ship threatened to break up, right? So they would have been familiar with this story. They would have known this story. They would have had this image in their head of God only does this to people he's trying to punish. But I don't understand what we did. Because they're looking again at Jonah and the storm. The storm was brought upon this ship because of their disobedience, but the disciples, been unquestionably obedient to Jesus. So they're asking themselves, why did the storm happen? Why is this happening right now? I don't get it. I don't understand it. And, we talked about it. They're not being polite with Jesus. This is a really pointed, really disrespectful question, right?
Yes.
They're going up to him. It's like, you don't care about us, do you? You don't care. You're sleeping as we're dying. We're perishing and you're sleeping. I thought I knew you. I thought I understood your character. I don't know anything about you. That's really what's happening in this exchange. They're angry at Jesus for
Yes.
bringing them here. It's like, I trusted you. You brought me into the storm. We're gonna die. What was the point of all of this? None of this makes any sense. The storm is so big around them that the only thing they can think about is that they were lied to, that they've done something wrong, that they followed a lie, that everything that they had trusted, everything they believed in was falling apart at this point. And they're looking at their leader, the one who had brought them there, as the one to blame. And they're taking that out on Jesus at this point. Just look at that in that context of there's panic, there's anger, there's hurt that's coming through in that sentence. And I think we've all kind of been in that situation ourselves, right? We're in the middle of a storm. We're pissed off.
Yes.
What is going on? I did everything you said, everything you wanted me to do, and still in the middle of a storm. This doesn't make any sense. And I'm gonna read a story, towards the end of this that brings this full circle. But yeah, this is a really heated conversation that's happening here. And I look at Psalms 44 that we kind of get David's response that kind of happens as or David's words are kind of the same thing that's happening here. And this is verses 23 to 26. And it says, "Awake, why are you sleeping, O Lord? Rouse yourself. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction and oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust. Our belly clings to the ground. Rise up, come to our help. Redeem us for the sake of your steadfast love." Kind of what, David's doing it. David's, borderline disrespectful here too, is right. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget me and all the pain and suffering and struggle that I'm going through? And he's commanding God, rise up, help me right now. This is what the disciples are doing, screaming at Jesus, do something. Show us that you still care. So what does Jesus do?
Speak.
He doesn't go after them at first, right? And this is actually where we get a little bit difference in the gospel. Matthew has him saying, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" first, and then calming the storm. Mark has him calming the storm first, dealing with it, and then using it as a learning moment for them.
Ooh, I never caught that.
I didn't either.
Yeah, so it's. I think you read it real fast, you're not going to notice it, but yeah, it's flip flopped in Matthew, and I think that it's pretty telling of how we're looking at this. So why did Jesus rebuke the wind? Why is this the first the sentence that we get here? And Jesus gets up and he shakes the sleep out of his eyes and just turns and rebukes the wind, right? So why did he do this?
He was showing who he was. He was showing his authority.
Yeah. Rebuke, it's the same word that's used to describe what Jesus did when he cast out demons. So Mark 1:25 uses it, Luke 4:35 uses it, even when he cast out fever in Luke 4:39. So there's been some theories that have been thrown around in a couple different commentaries that Jesus's action, Mark's looking at this as Jesus casting out a demon out of the sea, but it doesn't. There's not a lot of consensus on that. It's only like a couple commentaries that bring that up, and honestly, it kind of feels like a stretch that that they're looking at it as there's a demon in the sea. We don't get that any place really. That's kind of, I think that's reading too much into the scripture. That's just stuff that's not there. But I think
I don't
go
think
ahead.
it is. I don't think it is either, Matt, because what's happening is not uncommon.
Yeah. It's you have to. I think you have to look at this from Mark's narrative. Mark is a really good storyteller. That's that. We're kind of like the Gospel of Mark is almost like an action movie. It's nonstop. There's no slow periods in it. You're from miracle to here's a couple parables to some miracles, some teachings, then Passion Week, and Mark is able to keep the narrative going constantly and really drive home the points. And so what I think is happening here is that Mark's using this way, this narrative way of describing Jesus' authoritative command over the wind. So it's the same way that Jesus is able to have authority over natural and supernatural forces. This word of rebuke that's happening here. It's the same thing as that Mark is saying he's got authority over humans, over natural causes, over supernatural causes, and over nature itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same type word. It's the same connotation that we're getting throughout this consistency of when Jesus is speaking. It's with authority. It's with command. So this is also unique to Mark. Is this peace be still, right? So why do you think Jesus used these specific words?
Well, be still and know that I am God.
So I think the translations don't really do it all that much justice. He's basically telling the wind to shut up. Like that's really what he's saying is shut up and be quiet. Like I'm sick of this. Stop. Just stop. And it's he's addressing the wind and the sea. He's anthropomorphifying. I can't, that's a big word I can't pronounce, but you know what I mean. He's doing that to he's adding human animate qualities to the sea. And so when he's talking to the sea this way of saying shut up, right, he is kind of almost looking at it as like a living element, right? And he's just saying stop, right? Stop the wind, stop all of this. I don't want this anymore. And what do we get after that, right? So he says, peace be still, shut up, be quiet.
Matt, can I interrupt you for a second?
Go ahead.
So don't you think that God would have said just that? Because he has told people pretty much to shut up without saying shut and up. But he has pretty much said that to people.
Yeah.
So I think he meant peace to say, you guys need to calm yourselves because there's nothing to be afraid of. So did you do research and that's exactly what he said?
That's the Greek. Yeah. So that they're basically the same words. So it's peace. It's shut up, be quiet is really
the
what
Greek tell people peace means show. Wow. I like that word peace. I don't like it in the Greek anymore.
It's yeah. I mean, I think he's asking for peace and quiet, right? So it's like that's where the shut up kind of comes from. Is like I want peace and quiet.
Settle here right now.
Yeah.
Shush it. Shush it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's because I looked at it, when I looked into the Greek, and I was like, that doesn't seem to be like the words that are using there. That's why I dove into it, and it's really just saying, I don't want any more sound, and be quiet. Just be quiet. So it's there's still that authoritative command that's coming out of his mouth, right? It's not, he's not like, meekly going to the wind. It's like, hey, can you calm down? It's like, shut up, peace, no more. I don't want it anymore. And the wind ceases immediately. We don't get the word immediately in here, but it's the aorist tense that gets used here means that it's done. It's happened. It happens instantly. It didn't happen, gradually over time. That could be a natural event, right? It's not really, doesn't seem all that miraculous. If somebody's out there screaming, I have a story of this from Jenny. Remember when we were in Boston? And there was the Asian lady in the cemetery, and she was screaming at the sky, calling out to God, stop the rain. And then, 15 minutes later, the rain would stop, and then she would, praise God and, kind of act like it was a miracle. It's like, I don't know if that's really a miracle. It's like, that just seems like timing, like cloud cover moved over, right? And so if that were to happen, that Jesus is out there on the top of the boat screaming, shut up, wind, go away. And then 15 minutes later, the storm calms down. That could be, it wouldn't be effective. That's kind of, people would be like, it seems like a coincidence, but we're not getting that here. This is immediately happening. Again, this aorist tense, that it's immediately. Yeah.
But don't you notice when a lot of times during, all these, when Jesus shows his authority, it's not a 15-minute dissertation.
Yep.
He says it, boom, done.
Yeah, I mean, because it has to be like that, right?
Yeah.
If this was something that took 15, 20, 30 minutes, then there's a lot of other explanations for that. But when something like this happens immediately, right? It's like, the skeptic could still sit there and say, well, that's just a real interesting coincidence. But, most people would be like, that's kind of hard to explain. Of it to me, it seems like the wind and sea just obeyed this guy's command.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the sense that we get out of the disciples, right? Is that, they're asking the same question. They're obviously amazed by this. This isn't 15 minutes later, the storm calms down. This is, Jesus out there saying, peace, be still, and bam, the storm's gone. I'm seeing like, cloud cover disappear and then, crystal clear lake water, right? And it's just, there's no natural explanation for this. Because again, these storms, these are experienced fishermen. These storms would grow up instantly, get violent, and then dissipate, gradually over time. They would have known this. They would have experienced that. If that were the case, they wouldn't have been blown away and in awe in the way that they are here. So we're getting the sense this was something way beyond the normal. This was not just your everyday occurrence of it. So it kind of adds weight to Jesus's authority, that it was just bam, instantaneous, peace be still, and it's over. The storm's gone, and there's just crystal clear glasses. There's nothing left on the lake at this point. There's no sign that there would have even been a storm. It's kind of the image that I'm getting in my head. So, storm's calm, right? Now Jesus turns to the disciples, right? And he says, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Right? He's saying, look at that word there, still, right? He says, not have you no faith. This is the question. It's like, how do you still not get it? How do you still not believe is really kind of what he's expressing here. So why is he asking them why they're so afraid?
Well, I'm not so sure, I think it's in question form, but I think it's more of a statement.
Yeah. It's kind of a rhetorical question. at this point. They don't answer, right? It's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
more rhetorical. And I go back to, my example with Captain Bonifazi, right? That why would I have shown fear if my leader wasn't? And that's kind of what he's asking. It's like, don't you trust me? Because that's really what it came down to, is you don't trust me.
Mhm.
You don't trust me at all. How? How is it, like, have I not shown you that I'm not going to let anything happen to you? That I'm going to get you through all this? That I have a plan, that there is something bigger at work here. And I think Jesus is probably a little bit frustrated at this point. That how you still have no faith.
I think you described Captain Bonifazi and why you looked at him and said, all right, I want to be like that guy, is you knew he had had multiple experiences being deployed. It's interesting to see that, like, I guess for first, remind me, is this the first time they have truly been in, like, I'm going to use for what they believe was mortal danger? Like, they've seen Jesus kind of have verbal and mental sparring matches with the Pharisees and drive out demons, but, like, have they actually personally been in danger?
I don't think so at this point. I think this might be the first time that they've really, a situation has been this threatening to them.
Not that they shouldn't be trusting him, but that's one of the things, like, you had specific knowledge of actual times that your leader had been in that exact situation.
Well, it's like you say, Jennifer, you trust until you don't.
Right.
Yep. And Jesus talks to disciples, John, kind of as he's wrapping up the ministry, and he's getting ready to go to the cross, and he kind of reiterates this, and I you can almost see him kind of hearkening back to this moment on the sea in John 14:27, where he says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." Right? And again, this is, look at all this from the perspective of, this was an engineered learning experience for the disciples. Of just trust Jesus.
Yes.
Right? Because they needed it. Things got, they thought this was bad. Things got a lot worse for them as soon as Jesus went to the cross.
Yeah.
It was all downhill for on their worldly travels.
Yes.
Things got worse and worse and worse. And again, every single one of these guys outside of John was martyred, and they tried their best to kill John, and best they could do after poisoning him was putting him in exile. So things got worse. And this is I think, one of the reasons why Jesus used this experience is that it doesn't matter what's happening into this world. This is the new covenant, right? Jenny and I did Hebrews 8 this week, and this is where the author is talking about the new covenant, how it's better. It's a better promise. It's built on something better. And the old covenant was always about the earth. It was always about worldly possessions and living the best life here on earth. The new covenant doesn't make those promises. We're giving something better. We have a better promise. And Jesus tells us, stop focusing on earthly treasures that can rot, that can fade, that can rust. Put your eyes on the treasure that can never be taken away, that never goes bad, that's never destroyed. And that's what this new covenant is. And so, again, he's teaching that, not only them something really important, but for us as well. This is before the new covenant's been revealed. But this is a key part of the new covenant, is that things in your life, in the world here, might not be so good. That doesn't matter. That's not what you're working towards. Good things or bad things has nothing to do with your faith on earth. That's not what the promise is. The promise is in being in communion again with the Father for all of eternity. That's the promise that we're working towards. That's the hope that we have. And that's what got every one of those disciples through their martyrdom. Is that do what you want to me. It doesn't matter. None of it matters because I am assured of what I have. You can kill me, you can feed me to lions, you can burn me. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. And that's why they had that faith. And this again was, this was their learning experience. This was the in the army we had NTC, which is you have to either go to NTC or JRTC before you deploy, and it's a highly controlled learning exercise where you are designed to fail. Everything is stacked against you at that point for you to fail, so that you can go back and look at all the failures that you had and say, all right, if something like this happens where it is actually life or death, I know how to better handle this. And I think that's kind of what was happening here, is that this is a controlled environment. This is nothing is going to happen to them here, but they had to learn that, when the storm comes up on you, just trust in me. Don't freak out. Don't think that I don't care. Trust in me. I'm going to get you through it. But don't focus on the here and now. Focus on where we're going. Focus on the end of that journey. So, I think we talked a little bit about this, but why does Jesus seem so surprised by the disciples' lack of faith? He's annoyed. He's just, how do you still have no faith, right? How are you still
in a pig so we can at least die that way? Put us in something, you know what I mean? How would you feel? Of course you're going to be mad. So when I hear that peace be still, I like that translation. Good job digging deeper, brother, because I'm positive that's probably what was said. If David's called stupid, I think Mauser told to shut up, so how would you feel? I mean, would you feel pleased that you're just denying what you just witnessed? I mean, it's a question. So I would be a little disappointed. I guess disappointed. Righteously angry.
No, I think you're right, and I think it is there is disappointment coming out of Jesus at this point of just again, I think that's what I'm looking at. That's how I saw it is you go back and we haven't even gotten some of the bigger miracles at this point yet. But we're seeing Jesus doing preaching with authority, surprising people with how great he can speak, and he's not relying on other scholars. He's not relying on scribes. He's relying on his own knowledge and authority when he's preaching. He's casting out demons. He's healing the sick, right? He's doing all of these things, and these disciples are witness firsthand to all of it, and they're still not getting it. They're still afraid. They don't have faith. It's like he is disappointed. What do I have to do? What do I have to do to show you who I am? And it was probably a prayer that he had that morning. Knew that this event was going to happen. If the Father came back and said, "This is what you have to do. This is it. This is how you're going to have to shock them into starting to pay attention." We kind of get an allusion to this actually in Mark 4:13, where Jesus, I talked about this at the beginning, where Jesus says, "Do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all parables?" So Jesus alluded that even his closest followers still had a long way to go in their spiritual growth, and the disciples' reaction during the event, highlights just how far they still had to go. It's kind of what we've been talking about, like, things are going to get so much worse for these guys, and Jesus is doing everything he can to prepare them for it, because they don't really fully understand what's about to happen. They don't understand what they've signed up for, and Jesus is trying to give them all the tools that they need to be able to remain obedient in the face of these great storms that are coming their way. In just a couple years, things start going really, really downhill for them. So this is out of the commentary, and it's RT Francis, the one I've been using a lot. And he's saying here's what they lack here is not so much understanding of pistis, which is faith, which here as elsewhere in Mark is practical confidence in supernatural power, the correlative to miracles. So lack of faith makes disciples fearful, and it's unable to respond to a crisis with a confidence in God, or more pertinently in Jesus, which is the mark of the true disciple. So they're afraid, and they're lacking the proper faith to get rid of that fear that's inside of them, that inherent fear that anybody in that situation, that is a situation that is perfectly okay to be afraid of, right? Unless you have Jesus with you, then it's a whole different story. Then you should have the faith that it doesn't matter. But because they didn't have that faith, they let fear overcome them. If you do kind of like a quick survey, over commandments that God gives, throughout the Bible, the most common command is do not fear.
Yes.
Right? I got 4 of them here. There's a lot more. Exodus 14:13. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord." Right? Exodus 20:20. Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be done before you, that you may not sin." Joshua 1:9. "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Isaiah 41:10. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." So all throughout the Bible, this command, right? Have faith, don't fear. Trust me, I've got your back. That is the one thing that God reiterates again and again to his people is don't fear. Stop being afraid, just have faith. But the disciples lost all their faith and are overcome by fear. And so rather than trusting in Jesus and his plan, and I think, what's more disappointing is that they didn't even trust in his character, right? When they go to him and it says, "Do you not care that we're perishing?" Right? They're changing Jesus's character in their heads at this point, of this uncaring person, right? He's done nothing to warrant that. But they ask that really disrespectful question. Do you not even care? You don't care that we're dying? They've let fear just completely cloud their own understanding. They've collapsed underneath it. They've completely broken down. And, anybody that's ever failed in life, which is all of us, the big failures are the biggest learning opportunities that we have. I think that's exactly what's happening right here. Is that this you can't fail much more than how much the disciples failed. They lost every amount of faith that they had. They let fear overcome them. They forgot who Jesus was. They forgot the promises. They forgot his character, and they looked at him in a completely different light because of their fear. I mean, you can't get much worse than what they just did, right? You can't get much worse. But Jesus is using this as an example of how to teach. So, so we get, this next part here is that they're filled with great fear, right? This is a different type of fear, though. This is not the shaking in your boots type of fear. This is reverence and respect type of fear, right? After Jesus showed his control over the wind and the sea, they're starting to get who he is. They're starting to get it, and that's where this question comes in, right? They say, "Who then is this that even the wind and sea obey him?" So again, it's kind of a marking sentence. Who does the wind and sea obey?
The Creator.
Only the Creator. Only. I've got a bunch of different verses here, off of this, but Job 38, 8 through 11. This is God's response to Job. It says, "Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb, when I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come, and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. So this is God describing to Job how he made the coastlines, he made the earth in the shape that it is. Psalms 33, 8-9, let all earth fear the Lord, let all inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him, for he spoke, and it came to be, he commanded, and it stood firm. Right? So this again, Genesis 1:1, with a word, let there be light, let there be creation, and all was created. Psalm 89:9, you rule a raging sea, when its waves rise, you still them. Right? So this control of seas that's being given to God. Psalms 93:4, mightier than the thunders of many waters, mightier than the waves of the sea, the Lord on high is mighty. Right? So this attribute that's being given to God, he's mightier than the waters, mightier than the waves. He's able to control them. He's able to bring them under his own authority. And Psalms 107:23-29, I'm not going to read the whole thing. That some went down to the sea in the ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Right. So we see a lot of different messianic prophecies, through here. Right. That this story of God himself taming the sea. It was seen right here of Jesus doing this. So again, it's nobody else has been able to be attributed this, right? This isn't something that your average prophet can do. This power, this authority is only given to God. It's only been ever attributed to God. And so this kind of wraps up into the a couple of the other questions that have been popped up in the chapters that we read. So Mark 1:27, as they're standing around, he's like, what is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him, right? So they're asking, this first question, the first section and chapter that we got into in Mark of casting out the demons, are saying, who is this? Who is this that's able to do this? And then Mark 2:7, where he forgives the sins, right? He makes the lame walk, and he forgives the sins. And the Pharisees are sitting there and saying, why does this man speak like that? He is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Right? So these questions are already starting to pop up. It's like, all right, who has the authority to cast out demons? Who are the demons bowing to? Who are they, listening to the authority of, right? Who is this guy that's claiming to have the authority to forgive sins that's only for God? And then, Mark 3:11, and then, where the unclean spirits are bowing down, worshiping him, right? And crying out, you are the Son of God. So, we tie all this together, just where we are in Mark, Mark's asking this question again. Who is Jesus? Who could this possibly be that can forgive sins, that can control the sea and the wind, that has demons listen to his authority, that can make the lame walk? Is this your average prophet? Is this just some guy that came around? No. These are attributes that are only given to God. That is what Mark is making the point here, that this can only be given to God. All these attributes. You take it all as a whole, and it's the answer is, and what they're starting to see the disciples themselves, that Jesus is God incarnate. This is the incarnation. This is God among us. This is Emmanuel. This is what they are seeing here. So what is the big significance of this miracle then, right? This goes way beyond just the healing of suffering of people and casting out demons, right? This is, other prophets have done this, right? Other prophets have been able to do this. Moses and Elijah and Elisha. They've all done stuff like that. It was obvious that they were sent from God, but this has come something completely different. This is something that the Old Testament had been noted that only God could do. So, compare this event to the parting of the Red Sea, right? So Exodus 14:21. I don't have to read the whole thing, but the Red Sea is getting parted, and it says, "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back." Right? That's it. This is Moses is a vessel, right? He puts out his hand, out in faith, and then the wind drives the sea back. It's not attributed to Moses, right? It's not Moses that's out there parting the Red Sea and controlling the wind. It explicitly states, "And the Lord drove the sea back." So the miracle of parting the sea is given to God's power, right? And he drove the sea back by strong wind all night, right? So this is attributed to God alone. And then, but with Jesus as a single command on his own authority, right? He doesn't call out to God, right? His own authority, "Peace, be still," and then the wind ceased and there was great calm. So they're asking, who has this authority? Who can do this? And again, we talked about this question's been asked before, but we're going to see this, in Mark 6, and in a couple weeks when we get to it, that there was no clear consensus of who Jesus was among the masses at this point. There's a lot of talk about who he is. This specific event here, again, we don't know who was in the other boats, but for the disciples, this should have been plainly clear of who Jesus was, because this is just not something that any old prophet can do. Only God has the authority to control nature like this. So again, who else can forgive sins and have nature itself bow to the authority besides God alone? Who else? There is no one else. This is showing the divinity of Christ right here. This is there's no beating around the bush on this. It's not like a hidden mystery, right? Mark is asking this question, the disciples are asking this question, and the reader can sit here and say, well, all signs point to God. I can go through all of the Old Testament, all the Old Scripture. Nobody else has this authority. Nobody else can do this. So we're almost done here. But I want to get onto the application side, and we've kind of been touching back and forth on this a few times, but I've got a couple different parts of a commentary that I want to read here that I think makes really good points. Is the first one says, "Trials are not always punitive, but always disciplinary." So really think about that, right? So trials are not always punitive, but they're always disciplinary. This trial was a test both in respect of faith and works. Will they believe that they will be saved? Will they go on in their line of duty? Right? So Jesus is testing them at this point. They obviously failed. They didn't pass the test, but Jesus was using this as a way to teach, right? And this next part says, "They only measure Christ aright, who are forced to carry to him some great grief, and find by experience he is great enough to save them. It is when men have weighed him in the balances of some great necessity and found him not wanting that they believe in him. So the disciples are sent to school." Things have been going good for him, right? Everything's kind of been working out. Jesus knew their faith wasn't real at that point. It had to be refined, and it had to be refined through fire. And this is the way that he did it. I want to read this out of it's called The Pilgrim's Progress. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. It's by John Bunyan. He's a 17th century author, and he wrote this allegorical story, kind of telling the progress of Christian throughout their faith, as kind of this dream that he got. And in section 1, which is it's basically like the beginning of Christian's journey, and the main character's name is Christian. He runs into some issues, and this is kind of the part that I want to read. It's called the Slough of Despond, and so it says, "Now I saw in my dream that just as they had ended this talk, they drew near to a very merry slough that was in the midst of the plain, and they were being heedless, did both fall suddenly into the bog. The name of the slough was Despond. Here, therefore, they wallowed for a time, being grievously bedaubed with dirt, and Christian, because of the burden that was on his back, began to sink in the mire. Then he said to Pliable, and Pliable's one of his neighbors that he was able to convince to go with him on this journey to the promise. So then he said to Pliable, "Ah, neighbor Christian, where are you now?" And Christian replied, "Truly," said Christian, "I do not know." At that, Pliable began to be offended and angrily said to his fellow, "Is this the happiness you have told me of all this while? If we have such ill speed at our first setting out, what may we expect twixt this and journey's end? If I get out again with my life, you shall possess the brave country alone." And with that, he gave a desperate struggle or two and got out of the mire on that side of the slough which was next to his own house. So away he went, and Christian saw him no more. Wherefore Christian was left to tumble in the slough of despond alone, but still he endeavored to struggle to that side of the slough that was farthest from his own house, and next to the wicket gate, which he did, but could not get out because of the burden that was upon his back. So, this story is, we've got, this Christian, right? And he's just on the beginning of his journey, right? They've just left where they started from. Pliable is right next to his house. They're not paying attention. They're walking, and they end up getting, diving into quicksand on accident, right? And, they're struggling in it for a while. Christian Pliable turns to Christian and says, "Where are we? What's going on?" And Christian doesn't have the answer. He doesn't have the tools for it. And Pliable says, "What? This is not what you promised. Like, you said I was going to have happiness. I was going to have joy. I was going to have, all of these promises and all of these things that you said. And we literally just left my front door and I'm already running into issues. This isn't for me. I'm walking away. Forget this. This isn't what you promised. This isn't worth it." And so he struggles to get out and he goes right back home. But Christian continues down his path. He's able to make it through the mire. So, why tell this story? Because I think it really speaks to what happened here on the boat with the disciples. So, we talked about this before, but in Christian life, trouble will come in this worldly life. It's going to happen. The new covenant doesn't really talk about protection in worldly life. Bad things are going to happen. Expect them. Because this is not where we're going to end up. This is not our permanent place. So if we're apart from Christ, Satan's got no reason to put any effort into this. He's already won. He doesn't need to. Why would he focus? Why would he waste time? Why would he waste his effort on us if we're away from Christ? But if we're close to Christ, that's when Satan's going to try his hardest to pull us away. So expect trouble, expect tribulation, but know that even though Christ may not allow you to bypass the storm, he's going to get you through it. That's what we're getting out of this, right? They were obedient. They did everything that Jesus said to do, and they still ran into the storm. But they didn't understand Jesus' nature. They didn't understand that Jesus was going to get them through it. But that's exactly it. He wasn't going to let them perish. That's why he was sleeping, because it wasn't a big deal. They were going to get through it no matter what. He didn't have to still that storm. He did it to make a point, but he didn't have to, because he knew that he and the rest of the disciples were going to get to where they were going. But they didn't trust. And it's in that storm that we've got two ways we can really go, right? We can be like Pliable, or we can be like Christian. Are we just going to say, this isn't what I signed up for? I'm going back home. My life was better over on the other side. I'm going to go there. I'm going to throw away my adherence because I don't see it. I don't see it. So, forget it. Or we can be like Christian and say, I might not fully understand it yet, but I'm going to keep going forward. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to go through this mud. I'm going to get through this mire and make my way through to the other side. And because I know that there's a promise there that, again, my promise is not in this mud. I know that. My promise is not in this storm. My promise isn't in this life. My promise is someplace else. So, we can tie this back to, the parable of the sower, right? In Mark 4:16, don't be like the seed sown on rocky ground. So when we're facing tribulation and persecution on the account of the word, what Jesus said, they fall away. What we're supposed to do is press in at that point. What the disciples should have done at this point is not to fall away, it's not to panic, but to press in, to remember what Jesus has said, to remember what Jesus had done. They didn't have to go to him disrespectfully. They didn't have to wake him up in a panic. Just because said, Jesus isn't worried. I'm not worried. He's got us. We're getting through this. You have to operate in those moments with absolute faith. That doesn't matter how bad the storm actually seems. God's going to get you through it. And that is what the disciples had to learn at this point. Because again, I was James isn't with him at this point, right? But I was reading out of Josephus, and Josephus is a historian that accounted for the entire history of the Jews. And so one of his writings, The Antiquities of the Jews, he mentions Jesus in there. He mentions Jesus being crucified, and a little bit later he also mentions Jesus' brother being stoned to death. Being gathered up, being accused in Jerusalem and being stoned to death. And so again, all of these guys had to learn that the storm is going to come. You're not going to avoid the storm. It's gonna be there, but don't panic. Don't walk away. Don't freak out, because it can't hurt you. It can't hurt you. And that, we get an amazing story here, not just showing Jesus' true nature and who he really is, but we also get, when Peter, talks about being ready to defend his faith, and being ready to defend ours. I know he can look back to this story and look back and say, I screwed up. I really screwed up. But, the thing I can take away from this is that Jesus is still in control no matter what. Doesn't matter how bad that storm was. And he's like, that was a bad storm. Let me tell you, that was a bad storm. Things were not looking good, but it was all right. It was all right in the end. He got me through it, and that's all that mattered. And so, as Jesus, as Peter was there, and dying upside down on the cross, sure that was going through his head. Just like, it's almost over. Work's almost done here. Done everything I need to do. I'm gonna be back with Jesus any second now. And that's what got him through it. He never denied. He never denied again. He denied 3 times, right? But he was obedient to the point of death, just like Jesus was after the resurrection. So that's the application that we can take from this. It's just, don't let the storm overtake you. Press in at that point. Don't walk away. Don't be like pliable. Just trust in God that doesn't matter how bad it's going to get. He's going to get you through it.
Amen.
Good. It's good.
I accidentally stopped the streaming somehow. I think I hit a button on my keyboard, but I think we only missed like 4 minutes. I started recording, so I'll have to combine them.
Diane, you want to pray us out?
Sure. Oh, Heavenly Father, thank you for such in-depth insight into your word tonight. Seven verses. Wow, that's a lot packed in there. Thank you, Lord, for your word. Thank you for this group and our fellowship. Thank you for all the questions that were asked and answered tonight. I ask that you continue to give us revelation, Lord. I ask you to strengthen us through Holy Spirit, that we become closer to you through the word. I ask that you stay with us during this week. Keep us safe, keep us healthy and happy. In Jesus' mighty name, I pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.